I thank the Minister for answering the urgent question, and we now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Martin Docherty-Hughes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision for the purposes of enabling certain mortgage borrowers to switch to new mortgage arrangements and for connected purposes. As I do so, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me take the opportunity to thank the Mortgage Prisoners Group campaign group who have assisted me in bringing this bill to the floor, specifically Rachel Neal and Jill Hume, who are actually in the special gallery. To them and their team, I am very grateful. An estimated 200,000 people across the UK, including 40,000 Scots, are deemed mortgage prisoners, are thought to be at risk of losing their homes. Many have been stuck on high street rates since the financial crisis of 2008, unable to switch due to toughened borrowing criteria. And in January, during a session of Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister assured me that the UK Government was aware of the difficult situation facing mortgage prisoners and would be taking action. Yet, in last week, the Chancellor has failed to introduce measures to tackle the issue. It is scandalous, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the spring budget has, yet again, ignored the plight of tens of thousands of individuals and families unfairly trapped on crippling mortgage rates. As the UK Government sits on its hands, having made billions from the sale of closed mortgage books, mortgage prisoners face losing their homes through no fault of their own. And one has to beg the question of this unfettered capitalism. How many since the financial crash have been made homeless? And indeed, how many have lost their own lives? The bill I am introducing to Parliament today aims to finally end the unfair 16-year financial injustice and address the failures of successive Conservative and Labour governments. Now, let us not forget, for well over a decade, the UK Government were the ultimate holders of the mortgages to the UK asset resolution. Now, I can imagine myself thinking that any government would not do anything so deliberately to harm hundreds of thousands of UK residents in this position, and that a sensible resolution would eventually be found. Sadly, it was not a purgatory before things got better. Indeed, they were to get worse. In 2019, the UKAR sold a tranche of books, including some of my constituents, to a company called Heliodor, as I have mentioned previously. They had never heard of it, and with good reason, because it's an entity that neither I nor any of us in this House could borrow from. It is a vehicle that exists is to service the existing Northern Rock mortgages. Although it does operate in a regulated market, Heliodor's ultimate owner, Topaz Finance, is not a regulated entity and relies on third-party administrators who are regulated by the FCA in order to comply with its regulations. However, and it's significant in many cases, as of Kath Scanlon's et al. Report from the LSC points out, the setting of SVRs is not a regulated activity, meaning that a business opportunity for morally ambivalent vulture funds such as Topaz has been created, and people, our constituents, are offered up as hosts for parasites. Despite never failing or falling behind on their payments, our constituents find themselves subject to hosts of fees and other spurious admin charges. Incredibly, principally, some of my constituents' the amount they owned rose by almost £10,000 in a couple of years, with no additional lending offered, pushing them into negative equity as the amount they owed Heliodor became greater than the value of their property. The cruelest part of this sorry tale of modern Britain is this. As my constituent approaches the end of a 25-year term of their mortgage, having been forced into interest-only play, just a few short years as began to make repayments, they now risk losing their family home of a quarter of a century unless they can come up with the full amount owned to Heliodor. The aspect, I have to say, I find most galling in the inversion of the principle of home ownership, whereby people have ended up paying what is essentially rent to a vulture fund, which is almost certainly knows it will be able to acquire the property at the end of the term. Topaz Finance will have been licking its lips, I'm sure, at a deal that is basically guaranteed to be paid twice. First, through the monthly payments that my constituents have been making, and secondly, when Topaz Finance sells their home from under them in 2029 at a healthy profit over what is the property they picked up in 2019. Now, the long tail of the era of neoliberal economics is still pernicious, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it confuses the concepts that such as taxpayer value with that of as any would normally mean what it actually means. Taxpayer value to people like me is not found in pauperising hundreds of thousands of households. It's not to be found in scraping back every single penny that taxpayers saw spent on ensuring the economy did not collapse overnight. From this old social-fashioned social democrat, government is not a bank with shareholders that need to see the principal of the loans paid back in full. Government is an institution that is able to intervene in the economy at strategic moments. That is an idea that I think is slowly coming back into fashion. But I wonder how many of our national assets have found their way into the paws of this type of offshore capital in the intervening 40 years, leaving taxpayers with all of the cost, none of the benefits and absolutely hee-haw value. That's why this bill is essential, not only to hold this government to account, but to hold a light to the fiscal approach of the loyal opposition. The bill seeks to end evictions for mortgage prisoners. Let us do what we can to lift the burden that they have carried over the years. And I know from reading briefings that the government are concerned about what they call the moral hazard of acting. If these people in 2024 have not already had their houses repossessed, they must have necessarily have kept up with their repayments. So there's a strong case, I would say, for saying that the moral hazard lies in the other direction. Companies who have deliberately been stringing our constituents along. Secondly, surely it's natural to put a cap on SVRs being offered to mortgage prisoners, especially given the general climate of mortgage instability. Our constituents have been coping with higher interest rates for over a decade. Now, we gain nothing, Madam Deputy Speaker, from pushing our constituents further into debt. Of course, there will be a cost to the taxpayer in the abstract, but this move will be an investment that pays itself back through the cascade of money into our local economies instead of into the pockets of offshore vulture funds. I think the day of balance sheet economics needs to end. Finally, I think the government owe it to mortgage prisoners to find a way for them to help themselves out of this mess. They should look into providing a vehicle that allows our constituents who are mortgage prisoners to pivot back into the mainstream market. The first suggestion of the LSE report published is that there should be free, comprehensive financial advice for all victims, because that's what they are, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost 200,000 people who are victims should be contacted individually to help them navigate their way out of the quagmire that they find themselves in. Now, as I said, it gives me no pleasure, Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude that it appears that there is nothing that we can do to make up for what mortgage prisoner calls the extraordinary interest rates, severe financial restrictions and mobility and mental and physical issues caused by this government-made scandal. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, that does not mean we should not try.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Alison Thulis, Liz Saville-Roberts, Claire Hanna, Stuart Hosey, Ben Lake, Amy Callaghan, Sammy Wilson, John MacDonald, Duncan Baker, Caroline Lucas and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Martin Docherty-Hughes.
Mortgages switching bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 14th of June.
Friday the 14th of June. Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Ways and Means adjourn debate on question.
The question